The upcoming referendum will not be the First Nations people who decide this referendum. If that was the case, it would pass easily. Because it's a change to the Constitution, every eligible voter in Australia has a say. Do we need to do better by First Nations Australians? Of course we do. You know the data. People with a connection to this land stretching back more than 65,000 years or 3,000 generations, and a voice to Parliament enshrined in the Constitution is what the Uluru Statement set out as an invitation to all of Australia to walk with them, creating a better nation for everyone, for all of us, and to keep the Treasurer happy, providing better value for your precious taxpayer dollars, because that's what this will do. Now, the school teacher and lawyer in me is telling the MP in me to give you one message, and that's this. You've got this sheet, 92 words. It should have been on your chair. There's plenty of detail in the 92-word proposal that we're asking you to vote on or to talk to your neighbours about.
One of the things I've noticed is last week, I think the No campaign launched a campaign slogan, if you don't know, vote no. There's an alternative though, which is if you don't know, find out. And it's great that you've come today to find out.
In the 1800s, when the representatives of the colonies spent a decade negotiating how they were going to unite to create this new nation, Australia, not a single Indigenous representative was included in those discussions, even though they'd lived here for over 65,000 years. So as a result, the Constitution that came into force in 1901 contained clauses explicitly excluding Indigenous Australians. Now, constitutional lawyers, we talk about the Constitution as a power-sharing compact because it's all about power, right? It's the document, the highest legal rule book of this country, and it distributes legal and political power in our country, and it sets out high-level principles and rules for how power is exercised. But for Indigenous people, it set up a position of perpetual powerlessness. And the Uluru Statement talks about the torment of powerlessness that Indigenous people have experienced in this country. Now, that powerlessness, in my view, has its source in the Australian Constitution, which set up this really top-down power relationship with Indigenous people. Noel always used to talk about the elephant and the mouse dynamic that characterises Indigenous affairs, because you got this 3% Indigenous mouse kind of squeaking and trying to be heard by this 97% all-powerful elephant representing the non-Indigenous majority in our democracy. And that elephant, sometimes inadvertently, often has trampled the rights of the 3% mouse that has struggled to be heard. And that's why we've had decades and decades of unfair and discriminatory laws and policies made about Indigenous people because of this top-down power relationship. I'm talking about laws denying them the vote in some jurisdictions right up until the 60s. I'm talking about policies that denied them equal payment of wages for their hard work, sometimes non-payment of wages, have some rations, like Uncle Bob was saying, sometimes policies controlling where they could live, who they could marry, sometimes banning their languages from being spoken, and of course denying their property rights. But even today, even though most of that harsh discrimination is in the past, governments and politicians and bureaucrats, no offence, in Canberra and other capital cities, they make well-intentioned, well-meaning policies about Indigenous communities, but it's all still top-down. And if you read the Productivity Commission's report a couple of weeks ago into Australia's progress in closing the gap, well, the Productivity Commission said what Indigenous people have been telling us for decades, which is we are failing to close the gap. Why? Because everything is top-down. Because politicians and bureaucrats don't really know how to listen to Indigenous people or truly partner with Indigenous people. And that's why, for decades and decades, Indigenous advocates have called for substantive constitutional recognition, to create a fairer power relationship, to give them a guaranteed voice, from William Cooper in the 30s petitioning the British King, asking for a voice in Parliament, from the Bark petitions in the 60s, asking for fairer consultation when government makes laws and policies about them, and the Barunga Statement, which was given to Bob Hawke, asking for a national Indigenous body to give them a voice. Subsequently, ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, was created, but only in legislation. It wasn't underpinned by a constitutional guarantee. And so when problems arose and the politics changed, government got rid of it. This is why the Uluru Statement asks for a constitutionally guaranteed voice in laws and policies made about them. And that's what this referendum boils down to, a yes or no question. Do we think Indigenous peoples deserve to be finally recognised in the Constitution from which they were excluded in 1901? But not recognised in a miserly, symbolic way that Indigenous people don't want, that will have no impact or practical benefit for their communities. They've consistently asked to be recognised in a practical way, in a way that will help improve the gap and help deliver better practical outcomes in their communities. I just want to show you the constitutional amendment. Georgia, can we quickly put it onto the screen? And you've also got the amendment on a business card on your chairs. Now, Indigenous people, as I said, have been calling for this for over 100 years. But this constitutional amendment has actually benefited from input from constitutional experts and Indigenous leaders, including conservative constitutional experts, right? Very respected black letter conservative constitutional experts, including the Liberal MP, Julian Leeser, who, to his credit, resigned from the shadow cabinet because he supports this. Noel Pearson and I in Cape York Institute engaged with constitutional conservatives 8-9 years ago in 2014. And over 9 years, the drafting has been improved, streamlined, made more modest. It has been refined. And what came through the Parliament, what was endorsed by the Parliament a month or so ago, was these words. And I would encourage you in this debate, you'll hear a lot of noise, you'll hear a lot of myths, you'll hear a lot of misinformation. The No case, you'll notice, wants to talk about everything except what this referendum is about. They want to talk about welcome to countries, submarines, paper clips, parking tickets. No, this is what we're voting on. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. That is why we're doing this, to recognise those who were previously excluded. Clause 1. Clause 1 says there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. That's the guarantee. If we vote yes, we're telling Parliament, hey, there always has to be a voice because Indigenous people always should be heard when government and Parliament make laws and policies about them. That's our promise. That's our commitment contained there in Clause 1. Clause 2 says what the voice will do. It says that the voice may make representations. That's just give advice. The voice may make representations to the Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Pretty simple. Parliament and government make laws and policies about Indigenous people, Native Title Act, closing the gap policies, changes to heritage protection. All this is saying is that Indigenous people, through this voice, will have the ability to give advice on those laws and policies. And Clause 3, very important when people ask you, where's the detail? Where's the detail? Why haven't we seen the detail? Point them to Clause 3. It says Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. So whose job is it to create the detail? Parliament's job. And importantly, because the detail needs to be in legislation, that detail can evolve and change over time. This is a very modest proposal. You don't need to be a constitutional lawyer to understand it. The words speak for themselves. This is a yes-no proposition. Do we agree to recognising Indigenous people through giving them an advisory voice in their affairs, or do we say no, we want to keep the status quo? Julian Leeser, who is a constitutional conservative, who is a Liberal Party member, helped devise this constitutional concept. In 2016, he wrote, "This is the kind of clause that Griffith, Barton and their colleagues might have drafted had they turned their minds to it."
In the next however many weeks, you will hear a lot about what the voice is not about. You will hear a lot about what the voice is not about, as Shireen said. And that's because the people who don't want to proceed in this fashion know that what we are proposing, all of us who believe passionately in a yes vote and a voice to Parliament and constitutional recognition, we are putting to the people a pretty simple proposition. And that is, as Shireen said better than I can, constitutional recognition. Why? Because if we listen to people, then we'll get better outcomes for them. It's as simple as that. And you'll hear from the Prime Minister down, everyone from our part of this will say it is simply about constitutional recognition. Better listening equals better outcomes. That's what it's about. And as Shireen said a moment ago, you will hear all kinds of things about what it's not about. And our job, for those of you who have already decided to support this important cause, and maybe those of you that we hope to encourage and convince you to support this important cause, we have a responsibility amongst us to keep reminding people about what this is about, because the people who don't want to make this change will spend a lot of time talking about what it's not about. It's about recognition, it's about listening, and it's better outcomes. Now, you will hear a lot, people who want no to succeed, people who don't want us to proceed down this path. They will pretend in the course of the coming weeks that Australians have to choose between their pragmatism and their principles, or their pragmatism and their purpose. And really the main contribution I wanted to make today was to explain or to provide an argument that says that we can serve both of those things simultaneously. And obviously our purpose, our principle, that is the most important thing, and so I'll come to that second. First of all, I want to talk about pragmatism. And relax, I'm not going to talk about tax as much as GP did. It is, I've got to be honest with you, it is news to me that I can't tax Victorians more. So back to the drawing board on that front. But when I talk about pragmatism, I don't mean necessarily about the nitty-gritty of my Treasury portfolio. I'm not really here as the Treasurer today. I'm here as someone who deeply and passionately believes that we need to get this done, and I'm here as a supporter and a friend of everyone on this stage and all of you who share this view already. But when I talk about pragmatism, what I really mean, and I take my cues here from my wonderful colleague Linda Burney, and Linda Burney says, for so long now, we have been making, when I say we, I mean people in positions like mine, have been making policy for First Nations people rather than making policy with First Nations people. And Shireen had a version of that as well, and the way that Linda has put that so eloquently, that's really what drives me, and that's what makes me think about the pragmatism part of this. You know, we have been, even people with the absolute best intentions, even with the weight of the Commonwealth budget and the efforts of great state governments like the one that Mark's in, even with all of that effort, we're still not making enough progress closing the gap, even with the best intentions and the best will. And we shouldn't pretend for 1 second that if we do things exactly as they have been done, that all of a sudden, miraculously, we'll get different and better outcomes. We need to do things differently, and we need to do things better. And what better foundation to build that on than listening to people better? And so the pragmatism in this, it's not some kind of political calculation. That's not what I mean by pragmatism. I mean, if people genuinely want us to get better outcomes for people, then we have to do things better. And the best way to do things better is to build that on a foundation of genuine communication, and that means listening to people who have been the custodians of this land for 65,000 years. So that's the pragmatism part of it. That's the better outcomes part of it. And from time to time, in the course of the coming months, and we've heard enough of it already to know where this is headed, people will say, even if you think this is a good idea, it'll fall over on some question of detail, or we have to choose here between having a warm heart and a hard head. I think it's possible to have a hard head about this and to have a warm heart about this. And so I want to talk to you as well about the principles part of this, the purpose part of this. This is a generational opportunity that we have. I've spent most of this week releasing this long piece of work called the Intergenerational Report, which is all about the future of this country, right? And it's got lots of spreadsheets and lots of numbers in it, lots of technical terms, but it's really about what do we want the future of this place to look like? How do we create the kind of country that we would be proud to hand over to our kids, right? And I see this voice as absolutely central to that, absolutely central, foundational to that effort. And the reason, or one of the reasons why we are so heartened by the turn up here today, this unbelievable turn up today, on a Saturday, late afternoon, Saturday, it is beautiful out there and you're in here with us because I think you understand this generational opportunity. We don't believe in this kind of generational buck pass that says somebody else, our kids or their kids, can sort it out at some future point. This is a generational opportunity. Windows open and they close again. And this might be our chance. And in 1967, the country didn't say, maybe we can try and turn our mind to this in the 80s or the 90s, right? They got it done. When Kevin Rudd stood up in the Parliament, he didn't say, I'll leave this for Prime Minister Albanese. And when they did those things, when the country did what we did in 1967, when Prime Minister Rudd did what he did in the Parliament in 2007, most of Australia said, why didn't we do that earlier? All the predictions about the sky would fall in. All of the thing, the whole place was going to come tumbling down and it didn't. And people felt better about the outcome. And a lot of people said to themselves, why didn't we do this earlier? Right? And this feels a bit like one of those moments. This is our chance. This is our chance. I really believe it. And I'm worried, to be upfront with you, I'm worried that if we miss this chance, who knows when we get another chance? Who knows if we get another chance like this? I really, really believe that. And that brings me to a couple of points I want to make to wrap it up, because I know you want to hear from Tania in a moment. People will underestimate us. And I think those of us, almost all of us who are Queenslanders, you will read a lot of stuff about it's going to be, the voice is not going to get near getting up in Queensland, right? And I have acknowledged publicly, and I'm prepared to acknowledge with you here, it is going to be hard. It's going to be hard right around the country, and it'll be hard here as well. We should acknowledge that. Good things are often hard to do, right? That's what kind of makes them worth it, right? They're contested, and that's a good thing. So it will be hard, but people shouldn't underestimate us. They shouldn't underestimate our ability, your ability, to change people's minds. There's been so much underestimating our capacity, underestimating the country, but also underestimating our persuasiveness. Here in Queensland particularly, but right around Australia. They underestimate us because they think we can only do one thing at once. They think we have to choose between pragmatism and principle, and we don't. They think that a government can't be focused on cost of living pressures or the future of the economy at the same time as we focused on the voice. Of course we can. Good governments can do more than one thing at once. Bad governments can't. And so they underestimate us. They underestimate you and they underestimate us, and we've got a chance. And we've got a chance in the coming weeks to convince as many people as we can, armed up with the arguments that Shireen gave us, and armed up with the arguments that Tania is giving us, and supported by great institutions like Bees, supported by local members, but really most of the work will come at the community level. People will trust you. Your neighbours over your fence, they'll trust you. And if you have a strong view and you back it up with compelling arguments, we can get this done, right? And I ask you, and this is the last thing I'll say, I ask you to contemplate the morning after the referendum. Imagine waking up the morning after the referendum and we've fallen just short. Just imagine that for a moment. And imagine what it will feel like if we think in our private thoughts on the Sunday after the referendum, we probably could have done a little bit more. We probably could have done a bit more. You know, I was a bit shy when I was at the school gate or whatever it was. You know, I was talking to my neighbours and I had a perfect opening, but I thought, what if they don't already share my view? And so really what I leave with you, and I know we'll have a chat in a moment, we'll hear from Tania, but really I want to leave with you that we don't have to choose between our pragmatism and our principles, but I also want to leave with you, try and imagine the Sunday after the referendum. I've been trying to do that every day. You know, we've all got lots of stuff on. Everyone's got lots on. But we have to make time for this and make this a big priority, because we can't wake up the day after the referendum and wish that we had done more.
15 years ago, when I was Young Australian of the Year, I had like-minded people like yourselves approach me and say, Tania, what can we do? We need you now more than ever. We need you now to change the course of our country. We need balance, not just for Indigenous people, but for marginalised voices. This will change the course of the future for each and every one of us. Our children will look back one day and go, wow, they kicked the Trump idealism out, even though this is the propaganda we're running against. We need to change the consciousness of those who are so consumed in self and don't give a damn about other people. We are Australians, and that's not who we are. We give people a fair bloody go. I live in the community. I live with my mother in Kowanyama. I spent the last 2 weeks in 4 funerals, one in Arakoon just recently for my younger brother. I see firsthand the day-to-day atrocities, systematic atrocities that people face. I've gone to government, I've provided them evidence-based research of systematic failure. Our children are being passed through the system, reading and writing at a year 3 level. I didn't know this at 23 years old when I was Young Australian of the Year and stepping in this space. I'd gone and done a master's in public policy at Sydney University to understand the systems that hinder progress. I'd gone back out. I'd looked at education, training and/or employment to try and re-engage young women. It was easier for a young girl in a remote community at 13 years old who got kicked out of school and got lost in the system to become a mother. It's so much easier for them to do that rather than for us to take responsibility and provide them the basic, essential and human rights like a right to an education in order to arm this girl and accept her Aboriginality and her diversity that she brings to Australia and the intelligence she brings to the workforce. Was so much harder. I just got a text last night, another kid died from Kowanyama. We had 5 deaths just in the last 3 weeks. A lot of it health related, but this one died of rheumatic heart fever. Something that's been eradicated. But yet we call ourselves First Nation, First World country when we can't even eradicate a disease that's only in third world countries. Where's our bloody federal minister outside down in Canberra talking about the need to actually eradicate rheumatic heart fever, and we've got young kids falling dead whilst playing football because we can't get that right. I just wanted to give you an insight on the ground. There are some other Indigenous people who are anti-no. I get it. I get it. They don't trust the bloody government. But this is not about the government. This is about you, the people who choose the government. As both of these ministers said, if we don't like them, we get rid of them. So today we're actually more than ever asking for allies. So 15 years ago, 15 years today as a young mum, believe it or not, I'm a cattle farmer and I've got farmers around me on the tableland who are, they're so ingrained in their ideology of us stealing land. And again, it's the if you don't know, vote no campaign. And I just wish they were sitting in here right now and meeting other people and being challenged, because they won't listen to me. They think I'm going to go with a womber and a spear and take their land, because I'm not sophisticated enough to actually have an interactive debate. That's why we need you more than ever. That's why we're out there appealing to like-minded Australians, saying that we need you more than ever now, because I am sick and tired as an Indigenous person having bureaucrats and policymakers and government dictate every day of my life. I want to have a voice in the future of my children. I want to be able to help that 13-year-old girl become a brilliant mum outside of systematic racism and poverty. I want to ensure that she can go back to school and get an education. I couldn't find a program to re-educate young mums. There were programs for asylum seekers outside that the federal government was paying for them to learn basic English. But I couldn't find any program to educate these young women who missed out on years, even though English is their third, fourth, fifth language. Wouldn't it be even better if they would have sat in with the asylum seekers to be able to learn and engage? Again, we are a multicultural society and that's what we were pushing for, but funding hindered that. Policy and processes hindered that. I just want to say in 6 weeks' time from now, please really consider what Australia will look like. And it is more than ever now that we are and have always given people a bloody fair go. And we just want balance in our own country. Thank you.